The first time I realized I was in trouble was on a Tuesday night in October, when my straight roommate walked out of the shower wearing nothing but a towel slung low around his hips, water still beating on his shoulders, and asked me if I thought he should grow his hair out. I was sitting on our secondhand couch, pretending to read a book I'd been stuck on the same page of for 20 minutes, and when he spoke, the words on the page blurred into meaningless shapes. "What?" I managed. "My hair," Ethan said, running his fingers through the dark, wet strands. "Do you think I'd look good with it longer? Like, past my ears?" I should have said something casual, something rheumatoid. Instead, I stared at the way a single droplet of water traced the line of his collarbone and disappeared beneath the edge of the towel. "Yeah," I said. "Probably," he grinned. That easy, unconscious smile that made something in my chest tighten, and disappeared into his room. I sat there for another 5 minutes, not moving, barely breathing, wondering how much longer I could keep lying to myself. My name is Adrian, and I'd been living with Ethan for 8 months. We'd met through a Craigslist ad, his, not mine. After my previous living situation had imploded in a mess of unpaid utilities and a landlord who thought fixing the heat meant leaving a space heater in the hallway, Ethan's ad had been straightforward. Room available in 2BR apartment. Lil by Woosher month plus utilities. Must be clean, respectful, and okay with a cat. The cat turned out to be a 3-legged tabby named General Patton, who'd lost his leg in what Ethan described as an incident involving offense and poor judgment. The apartment was small but bright, with windows that faced east and filled the living room with golden light every morning. And Ethan was the kind of person who made you feel like you'd known him your entire life within the first 5 minutes of conversation. He worked as a physical therapist at a clinic downtown, which meant he left early and came home smelling like the eucalyptus oil they used in the treatment rooms. He ran marathons. He meal prepped on Sundays. He had a girlfriend named Jessica, who worked in marketing and wore perfume that lingered in our apartment long after she'd left. And I was a graphic designer who worked mostly from home, spent too much time on Reddit, and had been carefully, meticulously, desperately in love with him since approximately month 2. It wasn't supposed to happen. When I moved in, I'd promised myself I'd keep things simple, professional, friendly but boundaried. I'd had crushes on straight guys before. What gay man hasn't? And I knew how that story ended. With silence and distance, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from wanting something you can never have, but Ethan made it hard. He was tactile in a way that felt both completely natural and absolutely devastating. He'd clap me on the shoulder when I made him laugh. He'd steal bites of whatever I was cooking and tell me I should open a restaurant. Once, during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power, we'd sat together on the couch with nothing but the glow of our phone screens, and he'd fallen asleep with his head tipped back against the cushions. His breathing soft and even, and I'd watched him in the darkness and felt something so tender and terrible. I'd had to leave the room. Never told him. I never told anyone. The thing about living with someone you're in love with is that every moment becomes a small, exquisite kind of torture. The mornings when he'd stumble into the kitchen, still half asleep, and make coffee in nothing but his boxer shorts. The evenings when he'd sprawl across the couch, his long legs taking up more than his fair share of space, and ask me what I thought about some documentary he'd watched or some article he'd read. The nights when Jessica wasn't around and it was just the two of us, cooking dinner together, falling into an easy rhythm that felt like something more than friendship, but less than what I wanted. I learned to live in the space between. I learned to laugh at his jokes without letting my gaze linger too long. I learned to keep my voice steady when he asked for my opinion on the shirt he was wearing or the gift he'd bought for Jessica. I learned to be the kind of friend he needed, even when what I wanted was to be something else entirely. And then, one night in late October, everything changed. It started small. Ethan had broken up with Jessica. He didn't tell me right away. I found out when I came home from a coffee shop one afternoon and found him sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by boxes and bags, methodically packing up her things. A jewelry box. a spare phone charger, a hoodie with her university logo on it. I said from the doorway. Uncertain, he looked up, and I saw it immediately. The tightness around his eyes, the set of his jaw. We broke up, he said simply. I stepped into the room slowly. Do you want to talk about it? He shook his head. Not really, it wasn't working. Hasn't been for a while, I think. We both knew it. I sat down beside him, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. General Patton wandered in and settled in Ethan's lap, purring. I'm sorry, I said, don't be. He scratched behind the cat's ears, not looking at me. It's fine. It's probably for the best. We sat there in silence for a long time, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. Can I ask you something? Of course, how do you know? He said, when you really love someone, how do you know it's real? The question landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. I thought about all the things I could say, all the safe, easy answers. But sitting there beside him, with his sadness filling the room like fog, I found I couldn't lie. I think, I said slowly, you know it's real when you'd rather have them in your life in whatever way you can than not have them at all, even if it hurts, even if it's not what you want. He turned to look at me then, his dark eyes searching my face. That sounds awful, he said softly. I smiled just a little. Sometimes it is. He held my gaze for a moment longer, something unreadable flickering across his expression. Then he looked away. Thanks, Adrian. Anytime. After that night, something shifted between us. It was subtle at first. So subtle I thought I might be imagining it. But Ethan started spending more time at home. He'd join me on the couch in the evenings, even when he had nowhere he needed to be. He'd ask me about my day, my work, my thoughts on things that had nothing to do with design or rent or whose turn it was to buy milk. He started touching me more, a hand on my lower back when he moved past me in the kitchen. His knee pressed against mine when we sat beside each other. Once, watching a movie, he'd stretched out across the couch and rested his feet in my lap without asking. Like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I didn't know what to do with any of it, because Ethan was straight. He'd always been straight. He had dated women exclusively for as long as I'd known him, and probably long before that. Whatever this was, this new closeness, this easy intimacy, it didn't mean what I wanted it to mean. It calmed, then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday in mid-November, and Ethan had been out with friends from work. I was in my room working on a logo design for a client when I heard the front door open. Adrian. His voice sounded strange. Rough. I got up and found him standing in the living room, his jacket half off, his hair disheveled. Are you okay? I asked. I'm drunk, he said, and laughed, but it wasn't his usual laugh. It was something sharper, more brittle. I'm very drunk. Okay, let's get you some water. I guided him to the couch and went to fill a glass from the kitchen. When I came back, he was staring at the ceiling, his hands folded across his stomach. Do you ever feel like you're lying to everyone? He said. I froze. What do you mean? Like you're pretending to be someone you're not? Like you're, I don't know. Like you're hiding. I sat down beside him, slowly. Ethan, I think I've been lying, he said. For a really long time. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What have you been lying about? I asked quietly. He turned his head to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something raw and desperate and terrified. I don't think I'm straight, he whispered. The world tilted. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Ethan was staring at me, his pupils blown wide, his chest rising and falling too quickly. The words he'd just spoken hung in the air between us like something fragile and impossible. I don't think I'm straight, okay, I said finally, and my voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere very far away. Okay, that's okay. He let out a shaky breath and closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm drunk. I'm not thinking clearly, Ethan. I reached out and touched his arm, gentle. It's okay. You don't have to apologize. He opened his eyes again, and the vulnerability in them was almost unbearable. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "I don't. I've never felt like this before. About anyone. And it's terrifying." "Felt like what?" I asked, even though part of me was screaming not to. Even though I knew this could shatter everything. He sat up slowly, running his hands through his hair. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he turned to face me fully, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. "Like I'm standing on the edge of something," he said. "And I don't know if I'm supposed to jump or run away. But I can't stop thinking about it." He stopped. "About what?" I whispered. "About you." The words landed like a physical blow. I must have made some sound, something small and broken, because Ethan's expression crumpled. "I'm sorry," he said again. "God, Adrian, I'm so sorry. I know you didn't sign up for this. I know this isn't. I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just kept it to myself." "Stop," I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. "Just stop apologizing." He fell silent. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to process the fact that the person I'd been in love with for months had just told me he'd been thinking about me. "How long?" I asked. "What?" "How long have you been feeling this way?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Weeks, maybe. Since the breakup. Or maybe before that. Maybe that's why it ended. Because I couldn't stop comparing what I felt with Jessica to what I feel when I'm around you." I lowered my hands and looked at him. Really looked at him. At the uncertainty in his face, the fear, the hope. "And what do you feel?" I asked softly. "When you're around me?" He swallowed hard. "Like I'm home." Something inside me broke open. I thought about all the months I'd spent hiding. All the careful distance I'd maintained, the feelings I'd buried, the wanting I'd learned to live with. I thought about every moment I'd told myself it was impossible, that he could never feel the same way. That I needed to protect myself from the inevitable heartbreak. And here he was, sitting in front of me, terrified and honest and real. "Ethan," I said, and my voice was shaking. "I need you to understand something." He nodded, not breaking eye contact. "I've been in love with you," I said, "since the day you made me breakfast because you noticed I'd been skipping meals while working on a deadline. Since the night we stayed up until 3 in the morning arguing about whether The Empire Strikes Back is better than Return of the Jedi. Since every single small, ordinary moment we've shared in this apartment." His breath hitched. "So if you're telling me this because you're drunk and confused," I continued, "if you're going to wake up tomorrow and regret it, and pretend this conversation never happened, I need you to stop talking right now. Because I can't. I can't do this if it's not real." "It's real," he said immediately. "Adrian, it's God. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. You don't know that? You've been with women your whole life. You don't know if this is just curiosity or confusion or..." "It's not," he said, and there was something fierce in his voice now. "It's not curiosity. I know what that feels like. This is different. This is when you walk into a room, I can't focus on anything else. When you laugh, I want to figure out how to make you do it again. When you're not here, the apartment feels empty. I think about you constantly. All the time. And it scares the hell out of me because I don't know how to do this, but I know I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." I stared at him, my heart hammering. "Say something," he whispered. "Please." I don't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was sitting there, frozen, trying to make sense of the fact that this was actually happening. The next, I was leaning forward, closing the distance between us, and pressing my lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. And Ethan kissed me back. His hand came up to cup the side of my face, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone. And he made a sound in the back of his throat that sent heat cascading through my entire body. I felt him lean into me, felt the way his breath stuttered when I deepened the kiss just slightly, felt the barely restrained tremor in his touch. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. "Okay," he said, his voice rough and wondering. "Okay, so that was..." "Yeah, I agreed, 'cause I couldn't form coherent sentences either." He laughed, and it sounded giddy, disbelieving. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "Should've," I said. I didn't know if I thought maybe I was imagining it. That maybe you were just being nice because we're friends. I reached up and traced my fingers along his jaw, marveling at the fact that I was allowed to do this now. That this was real. I've been in love with you for so long, I said quietly. I thought I was going to have to carry it forever. Like this secret I could never tell. His eyes searched mine. You don't have to anymore. We stayed up the rest of the night. Ethan sobered up slowly and we talked, really talked, about everything. About when he'd first started questioning his sexuality, about the fear he'd felt, the denial, the gradual acceptance, about how he'd never let himself consider men as an option before, and how meeting me had unraveled every certainty he'd built his identity around. I told him about my own journey, about coming out to my family at 19 and being met with silence that had lasted months, about the relationships I'd had before, some good, some painful, and the ways I'd learned to protect myself. I don't want you to protect yourself from me, Ethan said at one point, his hand finding mine on the couch cushioned between us. I know I'm new at this. I know I'm probably going to mess up 100 times, but I want to try. If you'll let me. I'm scared, I admitted. What if this is just a phase for you? What if you wake up one day and realize you miss being with women? Or that you were wrong about this? He squeezed my hand. I can't promise I have all the answers, but I can promise that what I feel for you isn't going away. And I can promise that I'm willing to figure this out. Together, if you are. I looked at him, at this man who'd become my best friend, my constant, the center of my small world, and I felt something settle inside me. Okay, I said. Together, the first few weeks were a study in contradictions. We were tentative and awkward in some ways. Ethan had never held hands with a man before, never navigated the small intimacies of a same-sex relationship. And sometimes I could see him overthinking every gesture, every touch. But in other ways, we fell into it so naturally it felt like we'd been doing this all along. We didn't tell anyone at first. Not because we were hiding exactly, but because we wanted to figure out what this was between us before inviting the world's opinions. So we existed in our own private bubble, our small apartment with its golden morning light and its three-legged cat. Ethan would wake me up on Saturday mornings by kissing my shoulder, my neck, the sensitive spot behind my ear. I'd make him coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk. And we'd sit together on the couch, our legs tangled. Reading the news on our phones in comfortable silence, we cooked together, watched movies, talked about everything and nothing. And at night, when we climbed into bed, his bed now, or sometimes mine, depending on where we ended up, he'd pull me close and whisper things against my hair that made my chest ache with how much I felt for him. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said one night, his voice soft and uncertain. I turned in his arms to face him. You think? He smiled, sheepish. I know. I wanted to say it out loud. Say it again, I whispered. I'm falling in love with you, Adrian. Good, I said and kissed him. Because I'm already there. But of course, it couldn't stay in our private bubble forever. The first person we told was Ethan's best friend from college, Marcus, who came to visit for Thanksgiving. I'd offered to make myself scarce for the weekend, but Ethan had caught my hand and said, No, stay. I want him to meet you. Really meet you. So I stayed. We didn't make any grand announcement. We just existed as we were, sitting close on the couch, Ethan's hand resting on my knee, the ease between us impossible to hide, and Marcus, who was apparently far more perceptive than I'd given him credit for, took one look at us and said, So when did this happen? Ethan had glanced at me, nervous. About a month ago, Marcus said. Then he grinned. Took you long enough, man. What? Dude, you've been talking about Adrian nonstop since you moved in together. I was starting to wonder if you'd ever figure it out. Ethan had flushed red. And I'd started laughing, and just like that, the first hurdle was crossed. My family was harder. I'd been out to them for years, but our relationship was still fragile, built on careful politeness and topics we didn't discuss. When I called my mom to tell her I was seeing someone, she'd sounded pleased until I mentioned his name. Ethan, she repeated. Is that Is he? Yes, Mom. He's a man. There was a long pause. I see. I wanted you to know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Because he's important to me, and I'd like you to meet him someday. If you're willing. Another pause. Let me think about it, Adrian. It wasn't a no. But it wasn't a yes either. When I hung up, Ethan found me sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. How'd it go? He asked gently. She needs time. He sat down beside me and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. Then we'll give her time. What if she never comes around? Then that's her loss, he said firmly. Because you're incredible, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to be in your life. I leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. I love you. I love you too. Winter came to the city in shades of silver and white. Snow fell in soft, persistent flurries, blanketing the streets and muffling the usual noise of traffic. Our apartment became a refuge from the cold. A warm, bright space filled with the smell of cinnamon. Candles and the sound of Ethan's laughter. We settled into each other like we'd been, doing this for years instead of months. Ethan started leaving. Notes for me around the apartment, small. Silly things written on post-its and stuck to the bathroom mirror or the coffee maker. You're beautiful, and I'm lucky, and don't forget, you have that client call at 2 and once. Simply thank you for being patient with me. I started bringing him flowers. Not roses, those felt too obvious, but wildflowers from the market on Sunday mornings, bright and chaotic and perfect. He'd put them in a mason jar on the kitchen table and touch them absently every time he walked past, like he needed to confirm they were real. We had our first fight 3 months in. Something stupid about dishes and miscommunication and the stress of work deadlines. Ethan had raised his voice, and I'd gone cold and silent. And we'd spent 2 hours in separate rooms before he'd knocked on my door and said, voice rough, I don't know how to do this. Fight with someone I love. Can you teach me? We'd talked it through, apologized, held each other on the couch until the tension dissolved. We're going to mess up sometimes, I'd said. Both of us. But we have to promise to keep talking. To not run away, I promise, he'd whispered into my hair in January. Ethan came out to his parents. He'd been avoiding it. I knew, putting off phone calls, deflecting questions about his love life, keeping our relationship in a space they couldn't see, but it was weighing on him. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed when his mom called, in the carefully neutral way he talked about me when they asked what he'd been up to. I want them to know, he said one night. I want to be able to talk about you, about us. But I'm terrified. Of what? That they'll be disappointed. That they'll think I've been lying to them my whole life. That they'll, I don't know, that I'll lose them. I took his hand. You won't lose them. And even if their first reaction isn't perfect, that doesn't mean it'll stay that way. People can grow, change. My mom, she's starting to come around. It's slow, but it's happening. He'd called them the next day. I wasn't there for the conversation. He'd wanted privacy. But I heard the murmur of his voice from his bedroom for over an hour. When he finally emerged, his eyes were redrimmed, but he was smiling. They were surprised, he said. But they were. God, Adrian, they were so kind. My mom cried, but she said she just wanted me to be happy. My dad said he had questions, but that he loved me no matter what. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his weight settle against me. Feeling the way he shook with relief. I told them about you, he murmured into my shoulder. I told them you make me happier than I've ever been. What did they say? They want to meet you. We drove upstate in March. When the snow was beginning to melt and the first hints of spring were appearing in the trees, Ethan's childhood home was a rambling farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a garden that his mother tended with religious devotion. She met us at the door, a small, warm woman with Ethan's dark eyes and an apron covered in flour. You must be Adrian, she said, and pulled me into a hug before I could respond. His father was quieter, more reserved. But he shook my hand firmly and thanked me for making our son smile again. Oh, we spent the weekend there, eating his mother's cooking, comfort food that tasted like home, walking through the fields behind the house with Ethan's hand in mine. sitting around the dinner table while his parents told embarrassing childhood stories and Ethan groaned and hid his face in his hands. On our last night, his mother pulled me aside in the kitchen while Ethan and his father were doing dishes. "I want to thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For loving him? For being patient while he figured himself out? I know it probably wasn't easy. I thought about all the months of silence, of longing, of thinking it would never happen. It was worth it," I said simply. She smiled and squeezed my hand. "I can see that." Spring brought changes. My mother called in April and asked if she could meet Ethan. We had lunch at a small cafe downtown. It's awkward at first, stilted conversation and long pauses. But Ethan had a way of putting people at ease. He asked her about her garden, her book club, the volunteer work she did at the local library. And slowly, carefully, she began to soften. At the end of the meal, she hugged me. The first real hug she'd given me in years. "He's good for you," she said quietly. "I can see it, he is," I agreed. "I'm sorry," she added, pulling back to look at me. "For not being there when you needed me. For not accepting this sooner." "I'm working on it, I know, Mom. Thank you." Ethan started going to therapy. Not because anything was wrong, he said, but because he wanted to understand himself better. To process the internalized homophobia he'd been carrying without realizing it. To figure out how to navigate the world as a newly out bisexual man. "I want to do this right," he told me one evening. "For you. For us. For myself." I loved him for that. For his willingness to grow. To be vulnerable. To do the work. In May, on a warm Saturday morning, when the city was golden with sunlight, Ethan woke me up earlier than usual. "Come on," he said. Already dressed, practically vibrating with excitement. "I want to show you something." He drove us to a neighborhood I'd never been to. Tree-lined streets with brownstones and small cafes and people walking dogs. He pulled up in front of a building with a "for rent" sign in the window. "What's this?" I asked. "An apartment," he said. 2 bedrooms, big windows, a balcony. "It's perfect." All right. I looked at him, confused. "Our lease isn't up for months." "I know." He turned to face me fully, his expression serious but hopeful. "But I've been thinking about the future, about what I want. And I want, Adrian. I want to build a life with you. A real life. Not just as roommates who happen to be together, but as partners. I want a place that's ours, that we choose together." My throat tightened. "Ethan, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "And if you're not ready, that's okay. We can wait. But I need you to know that I'm all in. Completely. I'm not going anywhere." I reached across the console and cupped his face in my hands.
"I'm ready,"
I said. "I've been ready." Smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. We moved into the new apartment in July. It was chaos. Boxes everywhere. Furniture that didn't quite fit. Arguments about where to hang pictures and which couch to keep. But it was ours. Our space. Our home. General Patton adjusted immediately, claiming the sunniest spot on the balcony as his domain. Ethan set up his running medals on a shelf in the hallway. I turned the second bedroom into an office for my design work, and at night, we'd stand on the balcony together, looking out at the city lights. And Ethan would wrap his arms around me from behind and rest his chin on my shoulder. "Happy?" He'd ask. Always I'd answer. By the time autumn came around again, exactly 1 year since that first confession on our old couch, we'd built something solid. Something real. We hosted dinners with friends. We visited our families for holidays. We navigated the small frustrations and large joys of sharing a life with someone. We learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs, each other's love languages. Ethan started saying "we" instead of "I" when talking about the future. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. On a crisp October evening, Ethan took me back to our old apartment building.
"Out."
"What are we doing here?" I asked as we climbed the stairs. "Nostalgia," he said simply. We stood outside the door to our old unit, and I thought about the first time I'd walked through it, the nervousness I'd felt, the hope. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Ethan asked. "Of course." You asked me if I was okay with cats. He laughed. You looked so serious. I thought you were going to say no. I almost did. I'm allergic. What? He turned to stare at me. You never told me that? I take antihistamines every day, I said, grinning. It's fine. You're allergic to my cat and you moved in anyway? The cat came with you, I said simply. So yes. He shook his head, but he was smiling. I can't believe you believe it. We stood there in silence for a moment. And then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. My heart stopped. Adrian, he said, and his voice was shaking slightly. I know we haven't been together that long in the grand scheme of things. And I know there's no rush. But I also know that I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of this. Of us. He opened the box. Inside were 2 simple silver rings. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet. But I'm asking you to promise me that we're in this together. For real, for always. That we'll keep choosing each other every day no matter what. I was crying. I didn't even realize it until I felt the tears on my cheeks. Yes, I said. God, yes. Always. He slipped 1 ring onto my finger, and I did the same for him. And there in the hallway of the building where our story had begun, we kissed like it was the first time and the 1,000th time all at once. We went home that night. To our home, the one we'd chosen together, and made dinner and sat on the balcony watching the stars. I love you, Ethan said at one point, quietly, like it was a secret meant just for me. I love you too, I answered. And I thought about all the ways our lives had changed, all the fear and uncertainty and courage it had taken to get here, all the moments of doubt and the moments of absolute clarity. I thought about the night he'd crossed that line, the boundary between friendship and something more, and how terrified I'd been that it would ruin everything, but it hadn't. It had built everything. Instead, 2 years later, on a beach in California with our closest friends and family surrounding us, Ethan and I got married. My mother cried during the ceremony. His parents beamed. General Patton, who we'd somehow convinced the venue to allow, sat in the front row wearing a tiny bow tie and looking supremely unimpressed by the whole affair. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss your husband," Ethan cupped my face in his hands and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me." "Thank you for finding me," I whispered back. We kissed, and our friends cheered, and the ocean waves crashed behind us. And I felt for the first time in my entire life like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with him, always with him.